So, I don't like starting fights on the internet. Obviously, it's not very productive behavior, but I also feel like no matter where you are, no matter what social media site you're using, the internet is not a conducive place for discussion. I feel like it's too easy for people to just ignore or talk past each other, and any attempt to change someone's mind is ultimately just an exercise in futility. That's why, no matter how riled up I get online, I always try to avoid getting into an argument. Even so, I'll still occasionally come across something on the internet that gets me real heated. For example, a good while ago, I saw a thread on Twitter talking about which manga belong in the big three, a constant hot topic in the manga community that I don't want to get into right now. In the reply, someone essentially commented the following: "If Fairy Tail was a shonen, it'd have been part of the big three." There's a lot of things wrong with this statement already, but there's one part in particular that I want to focus on. If we just go to Wikipedia and look up Fairy Tail, we can see very clearly that it is categorized as a shonen manga. That's a search that took me less than a minute to do. And yet when people naturally started correcting this person on their mistake, they responded, "No, that's wrong. Shonen means manga from Shonen Jump." Now that is so unbelievably, ridiculously wrong that I physically reeled back in my seat reading it. Shonen is not shorthand for Shonen Jump. Jump is shorthand for Shonen Jump. It's called Jump Force for a reason, after all. I don't even know how this person came to that conclusion, because I have never seen anyone make a claim like this in my life. But I didn't want to get into an argument on the internet, so I didn't engage. Even so, it kept eating at me until I finally decided to make this video, because the truth is that while this person's misunderstanding was quite extreme, it wasn't an uncommon one. I'm mostly making this video for Western audiences, so just in case you're not familiar, manga can be roughly separated into four main demographics: shonen, manga for young boys; shoujo, manga for young girls; seinen, manga for young adult men; and josei, manga for young adult women. There are other demographics in manga, but these are the main four, and most manga that you read will fall under these four categories. They're not too dissimilar to terms like young adult fiction or teen fiction, and they're miscategorized just as often. The point of these demographic categories is to target an audience, one that is most likely to enjoy your story. In other words, a shonen manga is something that will most likely be popular with young boys, and a shoujo manga is something that will most likely be popular with young girls, so on and so forth. Manga are usually associated with a demographic based on the magazine they end up published in. Magazines are still the biggest way most people in Japan read manga, and those magazines target their audiences based on demographics. For example, Weekly Shonen Jump is a shonen magazine, so manga published in that magazine are also considered shonen manga. Monthly Afternoon is a seinen magazine, so manga published there are considered seinen manga. Magazine editors generally try to make sure the manga that end up in their magazines suit the audience they're marketing to, so these demographics aren't something that are just arbitrarily applied. I am simplifying things a bit here, but on a basic level, that should be all you really need to know. This is not something I just came up with on the spot, by the way. This is information that anyone could figure out on their own, and it's very easy to find in-depth articles on Wikipedia about this if you wanted some real sources. Even so, I still constantly see these terms being used incorrectly, and it's so common that even people who are big fans of anime and manga don't seem to understand how these terms are meant to be used. Most of the time, people conflate these demographic categories with genres or story tropes that are fairly common to manga in those demographics. You'll see them say shonen manga when they mean to say action manga, or shoujo manga when they mean to say romance manga, even though A, that's not what those terms mean or are used for, and B, there are absolutely shoujo action manga and shonen romance manga, so using these terms as shorthand doesn't really make sense in the long term. I get it though. I'm not going to be pedantic if someone comes up to me and says, "Hey, check out this really sick shonen anime I just watched." I'm gonna know what they mean. I'm not gonna needle them for not using the exact genre. However, let's talk about a different situation. Say a slice of life manga happens to win a Best Shonen Manga award, and a bunch of commenters start complaining, saying, "But that's not a shonen manga, that's a slice of life." That's a clear misunderstanding of how these demographic categories work, and one that's not as harmless as the previous one. Maybe the real reason I get annoyed whenever someone makes a mistake like this is that even when someone tries to explain their misunderstanding to them, no one ever really accepts that they were wrong. They always double down and insist that they're in the right. But you can just look it up. It's not as if there aren't huge Wikipedia pages explaining exactly what terms like shonen and shoujo mean, you know? It's not as if Wikipedia pages for the manga themselves don't tell you exactly what magazine they came from and what demographic they fall under, you know? It happens every time. It happened with this tweet. And it just got me thinking, how come everyone gets so defensive about this? How come everyone acts like you insulted them personally when you try to tell them they're using a certain word incorrectly? It's not hard to understand where these misunderstandings started. If you're a Western fan, manga isn't necessarily native to your country, so the way it works and is categorized isn't necessarily something you can understand instinctually. There was a long period in the past when it was honestly hard to get a lot of information about manga in America, and the only way we could really define terms like shonen back then were based largely on what your friends or other manga fans might know about it. Obviously, there are some people that just dislike being corrected no matter what. Obviously, there are others who hold a lot of pride over being a manga and anime fan and don't want to deal with the embarrassment of not knowing what they're talking about. But considering the subject in question, the way people react to being corrected as if they've been slapped in the face is a huge overreaction. To change the subject a little bit, I think at least part of the reason people get so defensive about this comes from the identity we derive from these demographic terms. They're separated by age and gender after all, and a lot of people can get really defensive about the stuff that's meant to represent their particular bracket. What's worse is that people like this usually do seem to understand what these terms mean, but disagree on which stories should belong in which bracket. How many times have you heard someone say, "This manga doesn't deserve to be shonen, this should be a seinen manga because of how dark and mature it is," or something along those lines. A good example of this is Attack on Titan, an incredibly gory and violent manga that is very popular in the manga and anime community. It is also a shonen series, something that a lot of fans seem to be frustrated about. They insist that the manga is more seinen than shonen because, to be honest, a lot of Attack on Titan fans are edgelords and seem to despise the fact that Attack on Titan is considered shonen, a term they associate with immature kiddie stuff. Meanwhile, seinen manga is associated with dark, violent, and mature stories that only truly cultured and sophisticated folks can appreciate. I wonder how much of this comes from a misunderstanding of shonen's actual age range. I think when people hear that it's for young boys, they imagine the age range to be from 5 to 10, when it's actually more like 12 to 18. You're not going to tell me that 12 to 18-year-old boys wouldn't enjoy a manga where fighters use swords and maneuver gears to fly around and fight massive, terrifying giants. And I wouldn't believe you if you tried. As if there weren't tons of kids that were huge fans of games like Resident Evil and Mortal Kombat, where blood and gore was literally one of the biggest appeals of those franchises. At the same time, there's also this popular perspective of seinen manga being the pinnacle of maturity and artistry, and a lot of elitism emerges from that mindset. I think there are plenty of manga fans who mistakenly believe that reading seinen manga makes them more mature and well-read than everyone else. And while I do think that the demographic has plenty of incredibly impactful stories, I mean, just look at the highest rated manga on my anime list and see how many seinen manga there are. You can't really chalk that up just to them being seinen. It's a gross oversimplification of what goes into creative storytelling, as well as a narrow perspective as to what constitutes artistic masterpieces. In the first place, I don't particularly like the idea that the only way to create a masterpiece is to write a story brimming with dark and mature themes. It's a very narrow-minded idea that inhibits creativity. After all, if that's all it takes to create a masterpiece, that's all anyone would do. The reason they don't is because storytelling is a creative work, and in creation there are plenty of ways to create a masterpiece, whether it be through laugh-out-loud comedy, heartwarming drama, or bitter tragedy. Aside from that, there's also the fact that young men are not a monolith, and while I'm sure there are plenty who enjoy dark, violent, and gritty stories, there are just as many who don't. Young men can enjoy all kinds of stories, whether it be fluffy romances, exciting sports competitions, or even immature comedies. You can't boil down seinen into just being about dark, mature stories the same way you can't boil down shonen into juvenile action adventures or shoujo into fluttery, starry-eyed romances. Aside from that, there's also the fact that young men are not a monolith, and while I'm sure there are plenty who enjoy dark, violent, and gritty stories, there are just as many who don't. Young men can enjoy all kinds of stories, whether it be fluffy romances, exciting sports competitions, or even immature comedies. You can't boil down seinen into just being about dark, mature stories the same way you can't boil down shonen into juvenile action adventures, or shoujo into fluttery, starry-eyed romances. If you want ultimate proof that the seinen demographic isn't meant to simply be constituted of edgy, gritty, gory manga, take a look at this manga magazine, titled Manga Time Kirara. It's a very fluffy manga magazine full of 4-koma and slice-of-life manga entirely centered around cute girls doing whatever they do. While I don't have a full picture of its popularity in the Japanese manga sphere, it is successful enough to have started its own line of magazines, with Manga Time Kirara Carrot, Manga Time Kirara Max, and Manga Time Kirara Forward all sporting similar kinds of stories. K-On!, Bochida Rock, Hiramari Sketch, Blend S, Laid Back Camp. These are just some of the manga that have appeared in at least one of these magazines. Now, if you go to the Wikipedia page for these magazines, you'll notice that Manga Time Kirara is meant to target a seinen demographic. In fact, all of them are. And that's because there are young men who would indeed enjoy reading about cute girls doing cute things. And I'm not saying this to say that this is real seinen manga, or that this is what real mature people read, but to demonstrate that seinen is full of different kinds of stories and is not a term to be used to glorify some while putting down others. Because when it comes down to it, that's what bothers me the most. Readers using these categories to celebrate themselves for reading the manga that they read, while subtly putting down those that don't. As I said before, these demographics are based on age and gender, so it's really easy for people to tie their identities to the one they most identify with. It's pure tribalism, and don't pretend that seinen is the only demographic where this happens. Every demographic has at least a handful of people who pat themselves on the back for reading the manga they do, whether it be shonen or shoujo or whatever. And it's wrong. It's wrong to use the terms like that. That's not what they're for. They're not there for you to congratulate yourself for reading the right manga, or to shame others for reading the wrong ones. They're there to help people find the manga they might like the most. Now, that doesn't mean you can't enjoy manga from outside your demographic. Some of my favorite manga are shoujo and josei manga, and even though I've technically outgrown the shonen demographic, I still adore and hold up many of those manga as classics. These demographics give us a starting point on our journey through manga, and it's up to us where we go from there. To deny that journey and stay firmly in one place is the antithesis of that. I've sort of veered off of my original point, but the main thing I want people to take away from this is that these demographic categories are not meant to denote genre, or quality, or maturity. They're a marker to signal certain audiences to check a particular series out, and attempting to use these terms in any other way simply muddies the conversation for new people looking in. The conversation over the use of these demographic categories does not start with me, and controversy over the huge misconceptions people have over them has plagued the Western anime and manga community for years. Yes, a lot of these mistakes are harmless, but a lot of them are not, and while it's not the end of the world if we don't, I'd like it if everyone could get a little more educated on what these categories mean. Not that I'm trying to give you guys a lecture or anything, I'm just rambling here. But if my video helps clear things up for you at all, then I'll be satisfied with that. Thanks for watching the video. This is my first time making something like this, so it's not very good. But I just wanted to put something out before I could psych myself out of doing it. I hope you did get something out of watching it, and if you enjoyed it, consider subscribing because I will be making more. Not sure how quickly I will be able to do that, but I will try and keep a consistent schedule. So thanks again. I hope you have a good rest of your day.